Time for a Meatful Meditation by Smithfield. We know a thing or two about meat. Close your eyes and visualize yourself prepping your favorite meaty meal like sizzling bacon, a flavor-packed and pre-marinated pork loin, or a juicy cut of ham. Now step closer to those high-quality meats and take a deep breath in and out. Go ahead and take a bite. Oh wait, you can't? Then it's time to stop the meditation and put the real quality meats from Smithfield on your plate. Smithfield, for the love of meat.
The Angie's List you know and trust is now Angie, and we're so much more than just a list. We still connect you with top local pros and show you ratings and reviews, but now we also let you compare upfront prices on hundreds of projects and book a service instantly. We can even handle the rest of your project from start to finish. So remember, Angie's List is now Angie, and we're here to get your job done right. Get started at Angie.com. That's ANGI, or download the app today.
To get the Crime Writers on After Show right now, go to patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, did a high school class project about some local cold cases lead to the identification of a serial killer? We'll talk about the podcast, Murder 101. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband, love of my life, and fellow DJ Burns bandwagoner, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Toby's like, what? Basketball references?
We're so into it. We are so into it.
You know, by now, I think it's probably all over. By the time people hear this.
I guess so, yeah. But we just
all our favorites have been knocked out, Final Fours.
I don't think our favorites are going to be knocked out. I love watching DJ Burns play against everybody. That guy is unbelievable, and he's so nice. Fun fact, you know how he makes money, Toby? Apparently he owns vending machines. He owns like two vending machines.
I did actually know that. Well, what's going to be interesting is seeing him against Zach Eady, who's got 6 inches and like 5 pounds on him.
Yeah.
I'll remind you that all of the listeners probably already know.
I know.
That all those people have lost.
Hey now. Anyway.
Also with us.
This is dropping Monday?
Yeah.
Thursday.
Oh, this is dropping. Yeah, it's all long gone.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Ignore everything I just said.
Also with us is private investigator, certified pet detective, resident cat lady, and author of the Piper Green series of cozy mysteries, Laura Bricker. Hello, Laura.
Hey, and the person who doesn't watch any of this. I only see the recaps on Good Morning America. That is my extent of my knowledge. So,
hey, you're probably the one person who did not watch the Iowa LSU game.
Nope.
More people watched that than watched like the Olympics or some shit. It was crazy. And finally, our resident Doubting Thomas, author of the City Trilogy of novels, host of Strange Arrivals, and the Patreon Deep Dive Book Club podcast host, Toby Ball. Hi, Toby.
Hi, Rebecca.
So, Kevin Flynn.
Yeah.
This is Thursday's program.
It is. And isn't it great to be back in the studio after our triumphant live show on Monday?
Yes, it went great.
It was fantastic. I still hear the applause.
Fun fact, audience, we haven't yet done it, and so we don't know how it went.
Our audience is sophisticated enough to get that. It may be an inside joke.
You know what else is going on Saturday?
What's going on Saturday?
In addition to our live thing,
What's
is
that?
the NCAA Final Four. Just in case you were wondering.
That's
okay.
right.
I'm tying it all together, yeah.
So, Kevin, what actually is coming up on Monday's program?
Yeah, on Monday, we're going to be talking about Stolen, Trouble in Sweetwater from the very famous Connie Walker.
Oh, finally. The final season of Stolen.
Yeah.
I'm sad that it's the final season, but I'm so excited to listen to it. Well, I think we've talked about sports enough, although there is some basketball in the podcast we're going to be talking about. And I would argue it's the most exciting part of the podcast we're about to talk about. Would you like to talk about the podcast we're about to talk about, guys?
No, but we must.
I guess so.
Let's do it. Leading off, let's drop that first clip.
I thought, well, I can do that unit on serial killers and that type thing, profiling. And maybe we could bring that in and we could look to see if any of these murders are related.
To engage his sociology students, Elizabethton High School teacher Alex Campbell created a unique lesson plan. The class would research a 1970s cold case known as the Redhead Murders. By semester's end, the students had created a profile of the possible serial killer.
Redhead killer profile. The sex is male, Caucasian. Date of birth no longer than 1962, no later than 1936. Height is 5'9" to 6'2". A weight of 180 to 270 pounds.
6 months after the students released their findings, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation identified someone who fit their profile. They said DNA linked a now-deceased truck driver to one of the half-dozen murders. But with links to the other victims still missing, a new group of Mr. Campbell students picked up the trail to solve the case once and for all.
But something very interesting we found in the last couple weeks of research was that there were similarities between the knots in cloth of Tina Farmer and the survivor, Linda.
From iHeart True Crime and KT Studios, Murder 101 traces how a group project turned into a potential break in a 40-year-old mystery. The podcast brings us into the classroom discussions on possible clues and an interview with the one person who might tie the crimes of Jerry Leon Jones together, his one surviving victim. Spoiler alert, we are going to be talking about lots of plot points from Murder 101. So if you want to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes for our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. So Laura, you can't deny that when you're in high school, doing something like this would not have been kind of cool, right?
Yeah, no, that's one good thing I'll say here is this is definitely something I would have been psyched if they had this at my high school. These students are motivated, they're invested, they're doing something that they find interesting, they're engaged in their learning, definitely working outside of class probably when they're not at church and basketball to follow up on things in this. So I'm this is really cool that this is something that they're offering in high school and that it's a real case and that they've been able to talk to criminal profilers, the not expert, the retired investigator. They've had access to some pretty interesting people through this class.
Yeah. So Kevin, whatever we say about this podcast, I know we're going to say a lot. You feel strongly that we can't blame the students themselves.
They must be held harmless for this podcast. But absolute props to the students. I mean, we can debate the actual value of profiling, which we have many times.
And we will.
But as an academic exercise, they nailed this assignment. It was great. I love that when teachers come up with unique things, hats off to them. This teacher, really got his students involved in something and got them to think. And so that's absolutely fantastic. And they're all very likable students. But like I said, none of the issues I have with this podcast has to do with them. I can't imagine us punching down at high school students for something like this, but the deficiencies with this podcast have nothing to do with them.
I will say, though, to Laura's point, these kids are so busy. The church life alone of these students, I'm if they spend half the time at church and they could probably solve every cold case in America. It is pretty astonishing. So, Toby, one thing that stuck out to me immediately is that everything these students are being taught by Mr. Campbell and by the experts coming in is basically everything that we have learned we should not talk about both pattern serial killer stuff, profiling. I found myself from the very, very beginning going, oh no, oh no. Did you hear the same things I heard?
Yeah. I think that's the thing. Project-based learning is awesome. And I think this was probably a good idea, but it's a subject that's surrounded with so much kind of myth and pseudoscience that you have to be kind of careful about what you're teaching kids to get out of all this. And it just kind of feels like it was taught 10 years ago or something before all these issues became sort of more widely known, the problems with these kinds of evidence and profiling and all this. So it was a little bit jarring to hear this stuff, which we kind of know is at best unreliable and at worst sort of useless, being kind of trotted out as, this is how you do things. And when they were putting together the profile that they read, and again, this isn't their fault. This is, you do research. This is what they say to do for profiling. But it was I feel like I could have done that profile without knowing anything about the crime. It's probably a dude. It's probably white. He's probably right-handed because 90% of people are. You can kind of go down the line and just be these are the typical things that you're going to say about a serial killer. And then there's like 2 or 3 things that are going to be kind of unique to this person. But really the big insight, and I don't think it came from them, it came from somebody else, was that it was a truck driver.
Right.
And then that was like the one insight that kind of came in. But even things like, knots.
But even
the way that they brought the truck driver in was like, it was the insistence of the actual profiler that was kind of pushing this.
It was terrible.
If you keep finding all these victims on the side of the road, give me some ideas who you could think would do it. And of course they would say, oh, it could have been a plumber, it could have been, of course somebody would say, oh, it could have been a truck driver. And I went, ding, ding, ding. Thank you. There you go. There's your answer, right? Truck driver.
The students had all these creative ideas about what kind of person it could have been. And the profiler was like, no, guys, you got it wrong. It's definitely a trucker. And I'm just thinking like, let them follow the assignment, which is to literally be open to a world of possibilities, right? Which is what you're supposed to do when you're actually looking to solve a crime.
Right.
And the dude is like, nope, you're doing it wrong. It's definitely a trucker. And I'm like, what the fuck? It's bad. But Toby, literally, when I heard the profile, I'm like, except for the part where he doesn't get along with his mom, that could be Toby Ball. 100%.
Oh, yeah. Keep your eye on me.
Yeah.
So, Laura, we are going to talk about a lot of production issues, but one of them is the hosting style, okay?
Yeah.
The narration is, in my estimation, I can't remember anything more than Laura Bricker is about to tell us what she thinks of the narration in this podcast. Now, Laura, you tell us about what you think about the narration in this podcast.
Wow. I don't even remember that much about the narration in this podcast, Rebecca. So I think my issue with the narration in the pod, there isn't one. There's some radio guy who's helping them out. I don't really know what his role is. Every once in a while he appears. There's the teacher. And then there's no one central person that I'm connecting to in a way that's like telling me this story. It's just like, here's some more audio of the teacher sitting around and talking to the kids, and then the bell rings and the episode ends. So I felt like if we had a host to tie this together in an actual narrative, I think this story could have been actually interesting, but it was just so repetitive and so long, and we're just hearing the same things over and over again. And I'm like, wait, which one is this? Which one is that? And like, I didn't notice how bad the audio was in the beginning because I only have one AirPod. So when I'm like walking around town, I'm just hearing like one thing. So then last night I was like, I am going to finish this freaking podcast. So I sat in my Bob's Discount Furniture massage chair, and my son Will just told me how to hook up the Bluetooth speaker on the massage chair. And there's 2 speakers, one on either side. And I'm sitting in there and I'm like, I'm going to listen to this fucking podcast.
It's like a scene from WALL-E.
I'm like, oh my God, it's not even mixed right. I'm like, because I'm hearing one thing on one side and one on the other, and it's going back and forth. And I'm like, what is happening with this audio?
Yep.
And then I just turned up the heat on the massage chair.
Kevin, what did you think of that?
This is among the most poorly produced podcasts we've reviewed in years. And if you disagree with me, you think that's too harsh, what other podcast does this sound like?
It sounded like the first couple episodes of the Murdoch Murders.
No.
But way worse.
It doesn't sound like anything you can point to. You can't say it's like, oh, well, it's just like that. It's nothing like that. Well, what other podcast sounds like a stream of Zoom calls separated by the occasional interjection of a 1-sentence line from a host?
It's true.
You know?
That's true.
Like even Happy Face and the Donut Shop Murders, which just felt like it was just directionless chunks of raw audio, were not this bad. And then when I think about it, I get so angry. The way you hated Shocking, Heartbreaking, and Transformative,
yes,
which I remember now because it's SHT, which is like shit, right?
Yep.
The more I thought about this, for the whole production value, the editing, everything that was supposed to be done by professionals, I got angrier and angrier each episode because it's interesting. Virtually in anybody else's hands, they could have told an interesting story. But instead, I just feel like my entire life's work as a podcast reviewer has been for nothing, and I should just go join a monastery or something like that, throw away my fucking microphone, and never do this again.
Why? Because a reputable network actually put this out, and it's trending on the Apple charts. It's like in the top 10 right now.
What?
Oh,
God.
I know these guys do a lot of TV shows, and they have, I guess, a podcast unit, but it's like, the fuck, man?
I was very confused. I don't know if anybody else was very confused. Who's the main reporter guy? Something Shane. Sometimes he's referred to in the third person. And I'm like, who's talking now? And referring to him in the third person. It's so confusing. There's one piece of audio that I heard at the very end of the podcast that is one of the most unintentionally funny pieces of audio I have ever heard in a podcast. It's in the final credits of the final episode.
Additional producing by Connor Powell and Gabriel Castillo.
Editing by Jeff Twa and Davey Cooperwasser.
Music by Vanacore Music.
And then it cut in.
And it's like, editor by Benjamin.
The name of the editor is a cut-in piece of bad audio, and then it goes back to the regular narration of the credits.
Oh, no.
It's honestly hilarious.
It's like a surgeon signing their name with a scalpel, and it's like, autographed by. Yeah, just
God.
Okay, so let's go back to the content for a minute. Academically speaking, there's a connection somehow between what this teacher is teaching and this assignment he gives these kids. And Toby, I know that you taught high school for a period of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you understand the assignment in terms of like the academic value of it and making it like fit a standard? Because he talked about how he tried to make it fit a standard.
Yeah, I didn't quite pick up on that. I think they just didn't really spend much time in it. I don't know what the deal in Tennessee is, but where you have state standards, like all the, required courses all pretty much have to teach to these standards because kids have to take the test. And then you have these electives like sociology where there's a little more wiggle room. So teachers can kind of meld those to what they're interested in teaching. And, he clearly is interested in true crime and I guess serial killers. But the stuff that they talk about seems more psychology to me or criminology than actual sociology. And I did have some questions about, other than just trying to identify victims of this one killer, are you trying to do anything else about, social aspects of criminality? Because, this guy, Jerry Johns, when we finally hear about his history, it's like, yeah, he's got all these things that would make him, at a higher risk, not of necessarily being a serial killer, but of criminality, right? Whether that gets addressed in the class or whether it's just purely like, can we figure out who else are the victims? I don't think most people would be that interested in that. But for me, I was kind of like, well, what's the curriculum here exactly? What's the final exam look like?
It's an elective.
Yeah, what are they supposed to be like bringing to college out of this?
Well, for Riley and Marley, nothing. There's no credit. There's no
getting credit.
nothing.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, that's not that unusual.
Right.
You teach a class and then after a while, it's like some kids are into it. You're like, hey, let's start a, whatever it is club. And you go on with it.
The teacher is super into it. I mean, one of my huge takeaways is how much he is into it and he keeps prodding. Like, I think we should have a press conference. And then he ends up doing most of the talking at the press conference.
No, we didn't.
The first press conference he did, I think we should track down the victim, and then he ends up being the one to call the victim and have these long conversations with her. Like, he's super into it. And, he obviously has the girls, they, by the way, their research is crackerjack. I swear to God, these two girls, if they weren't so busy, probably could solve a bunch of crimes, but he's super into it.
But that's pretty typical, right? When you're teaching an elective, it's like, what do I want to spend a whole bunch of time talking with kids about? So it tends to kind of go towards your interests. But I thought about that. It's like, is this guy like actually using like his students to kind of help him like his own kind of project, or is it really their project? And I could see like, I don't know, like if letting a couple of 16-year-olds interview a woman who was like nearly murdered by a serial killer. And it's obviously, well, not obviously, but probably suffering from some trauma that like, it seems like it's responsible to maybe as an adult do that part of it.
Totally.
But otherwise centering the kids almost exclusively seems like the way forward for almost everything else. And he kind of does it. I didn't come away feeling badly about him other than I just sort of felt like he wasn't as up on the latest as far as criminology and thoughts about serial killers and profiling and all this stuff as somebody who was taking the responsibility of teaching kids about this stuff, right? Like I kind of felt like he needed some more up-to-date knowledge there. But the only other thing I thought about this is at the end, I think, towards the end, one of the students says something along the lines of, our world is evil. And that just got me thinking, like, if I was teaching that class and some kid said that, I'd be like, "Ugh."
Yeah.
Like, is that really what I want to be getting across to my students, right?
Right.
Yeah, but I'd say, in Mr. Campbell's defense, he was saying how engaged the students were in class and they were volunteering, and then it got them really excited, and he was able to get this educational grant for it. And it was really able to get people interested in things that maybe they otherwise wouldn't be, like joining Patreon and hearing a bunch of exclusive podcasts that you didn't think you really wanted to listen to, but you love.
Just like that. It's exactly like that.
Yeah, I mean, they include things like the Crime Writers on After show. You also can get Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast. Toby just did a recording with his group for the assassination of Fred Hampton. How'd that go, Toby?
Oh, it was a good conversation. Sometimes I go into these not really having a good sense of where the conversation's going to go. And this was one of those. And I thought it was super interesting.
Mm-hmm. We also have Married with Podcast, the podcast in which Rebecca and I dish out advice about things, including this career advice to one listener who's got a new boss. That new boss is bad-mouthing employees to other employees.
Yeah.
And what should he do?
No good.
Also, there's Leave It to Bricker, which is where Laura Bricker solves mysteries in quaint AF Exeter, New Hampshire. One of those mysteries might be who drank all the alcohol this weekend? It was all of us. But Laura, you went to the Grange?
I went to the Grange to find out exactly what happened at the Grange. And it was, let me just say, quite an experience. The Grange is basically like the Masons for farmers. They have passwords, things like that.
The Masons for farmers.
They are. They're the Masons for farmers.
The Illuminati.
I learned all
with
about
hay.
it. Yeah. So stay tuned in the next Leave It to Bricker. It was quite an adventure.
Why do pumpkins cost so much? It's because of the Grange. They control the world from their star chamber of farming.
They're the farming deep state.
Yeah.
They are. There's a reason. There's a reason for the passwords, and you're going to learn about it.
The passwords.
There are more than 500 exclusive podcasts on Patreon at patreon.com/partners in crime
It's
media.
the next Dan Brown book.
The next Dan Brown book could happen in the Grange.
All right.
He's from Exeter, too. Who knows? Maybe that's where he got his inspiration. We have an Amazon storefront where you can see some of our favorite things. Rebecca, what are this week's Amazon recommendations?
I'm going to recommend the Fellow EKG electric tea kettle. It's the one that we use every day, Kevin.
That's the reason why our drinks are hot.
The cute wooden handle. It's so great.
Yes, and Toby, what are your listener-inspired Toby Ball's deep cut recommendations?
Well, Kevin, I've got the 2-pack USB-C wall charger, iPhone 15 charger block, 20 WPD power adapter, compatible with iPhone 15, 15 Pro, 15 Pro Max, 15 Plus, 14, 13, 12, 11 XS, X iPad Sam. And then next I've got Julep, It's Balm, tinted lip balm and buildable lip color, vintage mauve, natural gloss finish, hydrating vitamin E core, vegan.
Gotta get the vitamin E. Yeah,
Vegan.
perfect.
Thank God it's vegan.
I know.
Yeah.
Don't want any meat in my, my
Lip
lip
balm?
gloss.
Yeah. I got to add some stuff to our list.
Carmex fresh cherry lip gloss I'm putting on right now. You've inspired
I like the original flavor Carmex.
Ew.
Okay, shop us first at amazon.com/shop/Crime Writers On. We earn commissions on qualified purchases.
All right, Kevin, before we end the business section, I have to ask, do we have any Patreon Saints of the Week this week?
Our Patreon patron saints are Jennifer Bellini and Chris Wood. Bless you.
I bet Jennifer and Chris agree that the original flavor Carmex tastes like ski wax. So gross. Thank you so much for supporting us on Patreon, Saints. And for everyone who supports us on Patreon, we so appreciate you. Remember, you can do all of your shopping through our Amazon link, not just buy the stuff we recommend. Thank you so much for rustling through the business section. We love you all. Kevin, should I fade that music out right now?
Fade it out.
I'm going to go ahead and get that done. So, Kevin, you thought this show could have benefited from better quality sound design?
Yeah, better quality is always better, and that's why I like to shop at Quince.
Ooh, Quince!
Imagine upgrading your wardrobe with luxury essentials at unbeatable prices. Quince is here to transform the way you shop with a range of high-quality items priced within reach. So all Quince items are like priced about 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they partner directly with top factories. So you know what they do? They cut out the middleman and pass the savings on to us.
Why are you talking about this and not me? This is literally one of my favorite places to shop. Okay. I love Quince.
You know who else loves it? It's Laura Bricker. Laura, tell us about the last thing that you got from Quince.
I got my most favorite new prized possession from Quince. I got this really nice black motorcycle jacket, and I am looking forward to wearing it on my little pink scooter as I drive around Exeter this spring. So far, I've just been wearing it around town, getting many compliments, and it really is buttery soft, real leather. It is fantastic.
Indulge in affordable luxury. Go to quince.com/crime for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns.
Wow.
That's QUINCE.com/crime to get free shipping and 365-day returns. So if it leap year,
that's right.
You're out of luck.
That's right. It's clothes that begin with the letter Q, Alex.
Quince.com/crime.
Time for a meatful meditation by Smithfield. We know a thing or two about meat. Close your eyes and visualize yourself prepping your favorite meaty meal like sizzling bacon, a flavor-packed and pre-marinated pork loin, or a juicy cut of ham. Now step closer to those high-quality meats and take a deep breath in and out. Go ahead and take a bite. Oh wait, you can't? Then it's time to stop the meditation and put the real quality meats from Smithfield on your plate. Smithfield, for the love of meat.
So, Kevin, you did love the students, but there was a lot of student repetition, right? A lot of reports on all the victims. We heard the same montage at the beginning of every episode.
Not the fault of the students, but did we have to hear all of their book reports for each of the victims and stuff?
She was Caucasian and had shoulder-length curly red hair. Her age was estimated to be between 17 and 25, but possibly as old as 30. The victim was found clothed in a tan pullover, a shirt, and jeans.
Did we have to hear them say every single time, this could have been somebody's daughter, this could have been somebody's wife?
Well, okay.
Or Kevin, my one complaint also, the montage at the beginning of one of my complaints about the way the students were used, the montage at the beginning of every episode, which was endless, was, is he going to come for us? We know he's dead.
Yeah.
We know he's dead. Cut that out. We know he's dead, for goodness sakes.
Have you seen Friday the 13th, Rebecca?
But this all comes back to the fact that nobody was editing this. Nobody knew what was important. Nobody got the idea of like what we've heard and what we haven't heard and what we need to hear when. It's just we're just letting stuff go without any critical editorial thought. Now, usually a podcast is weighted more towards host narration with the sound bites supporting each point or narrative beat, right? And there are just like a lot of passage of just Mr. Campbell and the students talking, which, you know, is probably it is. It's not to them in the moment. That's a conversation people have. An editor's supposed to find out what's good, what's going to serve the audience, and give us that. And what an actual host could do is summarize some things, highlight what's important, keep out what isn't, and keep the thing moving along. And it's just like an absentee landlord in this.
That's a great way to describe it.
Yeah, but it's also like you're not thinking, you're just throwing shit out there. Why did we have to wait 12 minutes in episode 9 where these people just introducing each other to one another about, you know, the students meeting the
experts,
the district attorney, whatever. I'm like, I look down at the thing. It's like, we're at minute 12, and that includes all the commercials, which, you know, I think might be the reason why we had 10 plus episodes, because you could just drag the fucking thing out and make the money. But like one last point about not going to be one last point,
yeah,
but I just
want. Go ahead, let her rip, Kevin. This is like me with shocking, horrible, transformative. Go ahead.
Mr. Campbell starts talking to the students and then to the producer, basically the same conversation about Linda and how Linda is the hero of the story.
Linda, beep, you mean?
And the beep, right? They never explain. I mean, I guess we could guess. If you're smart and sophisticated, you can understand why. But all of a sudden, this beeping comes out of nowhere. Again, a host would come in and explain why you've made that choice or whatever. But Mr. Campbell, in these discussions, he calls Linda the hero of the story 5 times.
If this story had a hero, in my opinion, that is his final victim, which is Linda. So if there's anybody that's the hero in the story, it's Linda. And I was talking about her being like the hero of the story.
She's the hero of this story.
So the hero of our story is Linda.
We hear Mr. Campbell refer to her as the hero of the story 5 times before we get to hear him say that to her. And that totally takes the emotional punch out of it. It could have been a one really great moment because he's getting emotional and he says, "You're the hero of the story." And we've heard him say it over and over again. Not because he's repetitious and says it over and over again. It's because they don't make any decision to edit it in that way. And we just keep hearing the same stuff. It's not repetitive because people say the same thing to different people, right? It's that we don't need to hear that guy say that again to a whole new person, right? You're just not even thinking about the audience. You're just stitching together shit, and you don't stitch it together that well to begin with.
Right. But it doesn't help that before that, in every single instance, our absentee landlord narrator says something like, and then Mr. Campbell told Linda that she's the hero of this story. And then we hear him say that, it's every single time.
It's brutal. And I was going to say on the Linda part, I think the part that frustrated me so much about that is we have access to this incredible person in this story, in this case they're investigating, and they just let her ramble on this extended interview with no breaks, no anything. And it just, again,
it went on for 3 fucking episodes.
3 episodes. And I'm like, oh, is it still her talking? I'm like, I stopped listening to her the last episode. And not because she's not saying anything valuable, but because there was no break in it. It was like this long, rambling, raw chunk of audio with this woman. And I was like, that's unfortunate because that's a really good get. That's somebody that you're like, oh, this is a voice that we should have in this podcast. Unfortunately, the impact that she could have had being in the podcast is totally diminished.
Yeah. And one last thing on that Linda seems like sort of naturally a little bit of a nervous person. And, when she's, you can hear that kind of when she's speaking. And that's who that's fine. That's not the criticism. But it made me a little anxious to listen to her talk, for so long without any sort of what we would call dramatic relief.
And evidently each one that had that same tie. Sorry, it's hard. Oh God. Anyway, but he had his logbook.
We really need the host to do some more lifting and give people a break there, because the more we hear kind of going on and being a little worked up, we get worked up too for her. So 3 episodes of that, it diminishes the impact of what she went through and your ability to tell the story.
Right. But even the most sympathetic person in the world, you do not need to hear them say the same thing over and over and over again. And even these kids, the kids we get to know well, Marley and Riley, who we get to know really well and who we have to say are lovely kids, we don't need to hear them say the same things over and over and over again. So you're putting your own time into this project. Why are you doing it? Well, these could be somebody's sister. This could be somebody. This could be someone in my community. These people were around my age. This could happen to me. First of all, that's also a very unhealthy attitude that sort of seeped into the true crime listener. This could happen. And the fact that also the teacher is letting them go there. I'm like, please don't let the kids go there.
Your profile shows it wouldn't happen to you.
Exactly.
Isn't that what it shows?
Exactly. That's just a really, really unhealthy thing that again, some adult should step in and be 100% no, this is not going to happen to you. This
top line, you're blonde, so you're pretty much safe from this guy.
Not just that, but your life is very different. You're very whatever.
But you go to sleep listening to true crime podcasts.
Yes, yes. But that is sort of the disease of true crime, but it's also a part of the problem of the design of this project. By the way, Toby, were you not low-key very, interested in the outcome of this basketball tournament, though?
So this was kind of interesting, and I think it kind of goes sort of hand in hand what other people have been talking about is you hear a lot from Marley and Riley, but in some ways it would have been awesome just to have somebody else sort of narrating or just sort of leading you through parts of their lives. You learned that they play basketball, but the sort of change that goes from being in this club to being in class to being in basketball to being in church and all this stuff, they go through these days of these crazy shifts in sort of atmosphere and focus and things like that. And it just felt like I didn't really get a sense of what their lives were like. And I got a little bit of a sense of what they were like, but because almost entirely they were just talking about this case, like you don't get a sense of them as being 16-year-olds, right? You get a sense of them as being like student criminologists. And that ties into the whole basketball thing. Like it would have been kind of a fun sidelight to have a host be like, yeah, they won this game and this is what these guys did. And then the next morning they showed up and they were back at the serial killer stuff. Like you sort of intellectually know that they're high school students, but there's nothing in the actual show that shows them being high school students.
Correct. And that's the problem with this podcast. This podcast...
That's not the problem.
Could have been... Okay, let me just pitch you guys a podcast, right?
Do it.
We have 2 students, honors students, star basketball players, like one of them was homecoming queen, right? Literally, we hear that she won homecoming, right? They contributed significantly and solved part of a serial killer case, okay? That's a fucking podcast. So how did they do it? Let's meet them. Let's and they were taping them while they did it. They have the tape of them as they went through the process of doing it. Of course, they didn't tape any of the interesting parts of them doing it. They didn't tape any of the oh shit moments where she was actually on the computer and discovered that the 2 bodies were found a mile apart. They didn't tape any of that. They didn't tape any of their... But that's a fucking awesome pitch, right? Mm-hmm. Instead, we start 5 freaking years before with all this phone tape of these students who did this project. And we're like, oh, I remember when this... It's like, no, focus on these 2 little Nancy Drews who actually advanced this whole thing and like got a ton of shit done on their own time. In between going to church on Saturday morning and then going to basketball camp and then going to basketball practice and then having to go back to church on Saturday night and then going to church again on Sunday and then going back to basketball and then doing calculus and getting 100 on that test and solved a freaking serial killing case. That's a podcast.
That's a podcast. Yeah.
That's not what this was. And it really pisses me off.
But that's the pitch.
Yeah, that's a great pitch.
Yeah.
But I think that was probably very similar to the pitch that got this thing made, right?
Yeah.
But then this is what happened.
Yeah.
One thing that like also was never quite cleared up or like really looked at more critically is that there was really no confirmation that the student's profile led to the identification of Jerry Johns.
It didn't.
But you are never going to get that from the TBI because they fucking suck. The TBI. They would never congratulate anybody except themselves. And we saw this in Up and Vanished. Now, we'll say that Payne Lindsay
that was the GBI.
That was the GBI.
That was the GBI?
I think, yeah.
But
well,
all
them state BIs, fuck the BIs.
Yeah, those BIs all suck. They really do.
They all suck.
They do.
But, like, you couldn't throw them a bone. Like, it's very possible they had their press conference and somebody said, hey, smartass, how come you don't solve that? And they said, okay, somebody got embarrassed and said, shit, I better run this DNA. And that might have got it going. But, like, it would cause zero harm for them to say, and great job, students, because it would have been a heartwarming story.
Right.
It would have been like, isn't that great? And but it's got to be like, well, we never stopped giving up on shit like after they gave up on it decades ago.
Right.
You know, it was just so objectively, we really don't know whether these kids solved the case. I mean, they came up with the profile. They didn't name the guy.
They had the thing where they found that other girl, that Tina Farmer person.
Yeah, it wasn't the profile. It was the elevating the case and then online thing. Online people found the victims.
And that's not to take anything away with what they accomplished.
They accomplished a lot.
We just don't get that critical fact. We just don't know, and it's because the police won't say.
Yeah, I actually buy Marley and Riley's thing about the 2 victims being found with it. I mean, that's a
great one. Yeah,
that's a great. I mean, it's certainly worth looking at, if nothing else. Like no one else is looking at it, and they did. And good for them. Good on them.
Time for a meatful meditation by Smithfield. We know a thing or two about meat. Close your eyes and visualize yourself prepping your favorite meaty meal like sizzling bacon, a flavor-packed and pre-marinated pork loin, or a juicy cut of ham. Now step closer to those high-quality meats and take a deep breath in and out. Go ahead and take a bite. Oh wait, you can't? Then it's time to stop the meditation and put the real quality meats from Smithfield on your plate. Smithfield, for the love of meat.
You can start your day off right when you find a professional on Angie to get your plumbing right first. Connect with skilled professionals to get all your home projects done well. Visit Angie.com. You can do this when you Angie that.
Okay, let's do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, what do they think of the podcast Murder 101? Laura Bricker, thumbs up or thumbs down for Murder 101?
So this is thumbs down. This is one of the worst things we've listened to in a long time. I don't really recall when we listened to something that was this disorganized and there was like literally no structure to this podcast. It felt like, I think Kevin pointed out, like just a bunch of Zoom calls like attached together with no editing. And it's unfortunate because I think this is an interesting thing. We've got high school students that are working on this unsolved case in class. They're actually finding some relevant information, and that's really interesting. However, you don't need to listen to this podcast to find that out. You can go read the People magazine story like I did to get to the bottom of what these kids did. This podcast was just horrible. So unfortunately, it's a thumbs down.
Toby Ball, thumbs up or thumbs down for Murder 101?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think my sort of visceral reaction was as strong as other people's, but I mean, it seems like it without a ton of effort, could have been made into something that was pretty good and pretty interesting. It does introduce us to a couple of sort of unusual and, for what we know, compelling protagonists in the two high school young women who are in this club. And I think the teacher as well. I mean, I think it's a neat, even though I've got sort of reservations about how it actually plays out, like it's kind of a neat idea for him to go forward and having them do an investigation. Whether it needed to be a serial killer investigation, I don't know, but that's where we ended up. But yeah, I mean, I think everybody's going to say this, but I'll throw it in too, so you don't think I thought it was well organized. It wasn't very well organized. So I have a hard time wrapping my head around these things sometimes, and that it's like there's a story there. You've got basically the stuff that you need. You certainly have access to the people to fill in the stuff that you don't have. And for whatever reason, they just kind of threw out what they apparently had on them in sort of roughly chronological order and just called it a day. And there must have been more to it than that, but I don't know why a little more time wasn't put into sort of organization and storytelling and stuff like that, because I think there was a chance for this to be, pretty good, but it's not. So I give it a thumbs down. Some of the people involved in this are likable and admirable. And so it's too bad that the podcast in the end doesn't really do justice to it.
Kevin Flynn.
The high school has a criminal profiling class. Does it have a podcast production class? Because this sounds like it was edited by a bunch of fucking 14-year-olds who don't have access to the internet.
Ooh.
This is the double-spaced 16-point font version of a 10-plus part podcast series. Last week, we talked about one of the probably best podcasts we've ever heard. And this week, I'm talking about one of the worst I think I've ever heard. Here's the final lesson. Don't make a podcast that sounds like it was produced on the iPhone version of GarageBand and Voice Memo.
Actually, you know what was made on the iPhone version of GarageBand and Voice Memo? Done Disappeared.
Oh,
and it sounded great. He recorded that thing with his AirPods. So, yeah, I'm a hard thumbs down for this. And I'll say, aside from it sounding terrible and being terrible, like it did those kids dirty. It really did.
Loved the kids.
The kids are great. Did them dirty. Like the pitch for this is just so strong. It reminds me of that like Orange Street Daily newspaper kid, right? Like that, whatever that's called, that little girl who like wrote the newspaper and like, covered the murders in her town or whatever. Anyway, good concept. But a couple of things about it really bothered me. One of them is sort of the lack of a critical eye toward Mr. Campbell's approach to the crime stuff and the stuff that actually the kids were being taught by the experts, because the stuff that you were being taught by the experts was just wrong. It's just bad. Like profiling is not good science, and the pattern stuff was not good, and the psychology stuff was just outdated. And so that stuff is not great, and there was no sort of critical eye toward it in the podcast. And, a well put together podcast may have at least, sort of framed some of that. But that being said, none of that even matters, because Mr. Campbell's a good teacher. These kids are good kids, and they were done freaking dirty by the horrible presentation and production and writing and everything surrounding this thing. It is just a sloppy mess, and it is unlistenable. I mean, it's unlistenable on 1 speed, it's unlistenable on double speed, it's unlistenable on 1.5 speed. I tried everything. It is freaking unlistenable.
But did you try listening in a massage chair?
I did not.
No. You wanted to go to sleep is what you're saying.
Yeah.
But you know what, like, the theme here is that, like, the kids did all the work and the investigators reaped the benefits. Again, the kids did all the work for this podcast and the producers reaped the benefits. By doing almost nothing.
Yeah. It's bad. It's just real bad. Feel free to listen to a few minutes of it just to get confirmation of what we're talking about. And you listen to the first episode and you'll be like, this isn't as bad as they're talking about. Listen to like episode 4. You'll totally get it. So a huge thumbs down for me for Murder 101. I don't feel bad for saying it. I just feel bad for Marley and Riley because they deserve better. That's going to do it for us. But before we go, Laura Bricker, I have a question for you. Do we have a cat of the week this week?
We have a cockatiel of the week.
Oh, really?
Cockatiel.
A bird?
Yes. This is an Exeter story. Stolen cockatiel Jester returned to the Friendly Pet Store in Exeter.
Wow.
After he was stolen. Now listen to this. The cockatiel, not yet a year old, was stolen from her nest at the Friendly Pets on March 4th. You're going to love this. So this lady comes in, a middle-aged woman walked into the store just before 1 p.m., spent a long time in the store, and then inquired about adopting Jasper. And there was no reason for them to think anything was amiss. And so the employee went to get the paperwork for the adoption. The lady fled the store. She put the bird into a reusable shopping bag.
What? She flew the coop? She flew the coop?
And left the store with Jasper. They alerted the police. They put her on, they had surveillance footage. And when they basically went on social media, they were able to get some information and the bird was returned. But this is the craziest thing. I love it. She put the bird in a shopping bag. And this is right next to this little gourmet store that I go in all the time. So I could have been there when this happened. I could have done some cat detective / cockatiel detective work and solved the case right there. But I didn't. But now
can you give us a description? Solved. Yeah, it's a little bird. It's yellow. It's got a little beak.
The bird is doing well. I guess if you want to adopt a bird now, the bird is seeking a loving home. The price of adopting the bird varies. Interested parties should visit in person. Don't bring your shopping bag.
Very, very interesting. All right, Laura Bricker, if folks want to reach out to you on social media to pitch their pets or any kind of animal to be cat of the week, how can they find you there?
At Laura Bricker on Twitter and Instagram.
Toby Ball, folks want to reach out to you and ask you more about your storied former high school teaching career. How can they find you on social media?
At Toby Ball NH.
What about you, Kevin Flynn? How can you be found?
I'm at Kevin P. Flynn.
Well, you can find me everywhere on all the apps at Reb Lavoie. You can also follow the show everywhere at Crime Writers On. You can also find us on YouTube if you want to listen to the podcast there. But mostly, I encourage you really strenuously to join our incredible community in our official Crime Writers On Facebook group. Find us on Facebook, hit join the group. We'll let you in if you're not a jerk. You can also discuss the show further on Reddit at the Crime Writers On subreddit. There's some good conversations happening there. Get episodes early and ad-free at patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media. You'll get the Crime Writers On After Show, Married with Podcast, Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast, and Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcasts. Our theme song was composed and performed by Ty Gibbons. Our line editor is the terrific Livy Burdett. The executive producer of this program is Kevin Flynn. This show was recorded in the Treehouse Yoga Studio above the Mockingbird Cafe in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi studio, otherwise known as Studio C, The Closet, in our New Hampshire basement, where we also are prepping for the state championship basketball game. On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later. By the way, how many times did we hear Riley say she was the outgoing one and Marley was the shy one? 100?
Only the outgoing one would say that.
These poor kids.
I'm the shy one.
She wasn't going to have to wait around for Marley to come up with it. She's so shy.
Partners in Crime Media.
Time for a meatful meditation by Smithfield. We know a thing or two about meat. Close your eyes and visualize yourself prepping your favorite meaty meal like sizzling bacon, a flavor-packed and pre-marinated pork loin, or a juicy cut of ham. Now step closer to those high-quality meats and take a deep breath in. and out. Go ahead and take a bite. Oh wait, you can't? Then it's time to stop the meditation and put the real quality meats from Smithfield on your plate. Smithfield, for the love of meat.